Hey everybody, today we are in the studio with Chantal Al Arab, and we are talking about all the things that you need to know if you're going to study abroad in Copenhagen.
Yeah, and Chantal, you're an expert because you do work at DIS, one of the big study abroad centers here in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I think that students need to be aware if they're coming abroad is going to be that it is not an inexpensive country. You need to have a budget and realize that this is not going to be like studying in Madrid or Rome. It's going to be a bit expensive.
Yeah. I think that when you study in Copenhagen, depending on the program you're in, of course you can get scholarships and so on, but you still have to budget. And it's about figuring out what's important to you while you're abroad. There are, of course, a few places where you can save some money. I would say cook at home. Don't expect that you can go out every night because eating out is expensive.
Yes.
And that's not just student budget.
No, that's for everyone. I mean, with a sort of living wage for waiters,
Yes.
you sort of also get a reflection in sort of the price of eating out. Apart from that, get a thermos and make coffee at home.
Yeah.
Instead of spending those daily 45, 50 kroner on a to-go coffee, just make coffee at home. You'll actually save a lot of money and still be caffeinated
Yes.
during the day. And then there's a lot of free things you can do in the city. Copenhagen is actually quite a wonderful city in terms of cultural events and so on that won't break the bank. Well, in the summer, we have a jazz festival. We have all sorts of cultural festivals all year around. In February, there's a wonderful light festival where you can literally just walk the city and then you'll see beautiful light installations. So depending on the time of the year, you actually don't have to pay to get into a museum. You can actually also just use the city itself as your gallery.
Great. So a lot of ways that you can protect your budget along the way. For non-students, of course, if you're working in Denmark, you kind of have a salary that matches that, but on a student budget, it can be really tricky.
But even if you're working in Copenhagen, I would say still cook at home once in a while
Yes.
because
Yeah.
if you eat out every single night of the week,
it adds
it's
up.
expensive.
you'll go broke.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how about the way that people dress? That's something that I see often discussed on some of the student boards and things like that. But of course, when you're moving to Denmark or Copenhagen, really anywhere in Scandinavia, you're going to have to be prepared for all different types of weather, sometimes in the same day.
Yeah, I would say layering is key. It's really wearing layers is everything. It's about figuring out, especially if you're biking, this idea that when you're on your bike, you'll get really hot, you'll get really sweaty. First of all, you want to wear fibers that can sort of breathe. So don't wear what I'm wearing at the moment because this doesn't breathe. Wear natural fiber and then layer it so that you can take off one layer when you're biking, wear something that's waterproof on the outside because you'll most likely be caught in the rain at some point during the day. And then you can always switch up your outfit. And the benefit of wearing layers is that it looks really cute.
Mm-hmm. You're ready for any situation and you can accommodate yourself perfectly in that way.
And I've talked to a lot of students, some even at DIS, who said things about the things that they read or heard about online, that everybody wears black all the time and nobody wears wedges and heels. And they were like, I'm going to do whatever I feel like. I'm going to keep my style. And then they got here and realized there's a lot of practical reasons why.
Oh, the
why people wear
cobblestone.
that
The cobblestone.
Yeah.
Let's be real. The cobblestone will ruin your heels. Just put on a nice trainer. I'm actually currently wearing trainers just because when you have to walk on cobblestone every single day, you will break an ankle.
Oh, yes.
So the flatter, the comfier, the better.
Yes.
And it can still be chic.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think another thing that to be aware of, especially if you're coming to study in Copenhagen, and we hear this a lot from people in the States, they're like, oh, I assume when you travel, you take the train everywhere. You're in the middle of Europe, and you realize that Copenhagen's on the edge of an island that's a short train ride away from basically just southern Sweden and the rest of Denmark. So I think a key tip is to realize if you are going to go travel to elsewhere in Europe, realize it's going to be a cheap Ryanair flight, not a Eurorail pass to go to Prague.
Yeah, and I think it's also, especially if you're a student, ask yourself, are you going to study abroad? Are you going to travel abroad? I would say sometimes less is more. You don't have to go away every weekend. First of all, we're in the middle of a climate crisis. But second of all, you don't actually have to go away. The city of Copenhagen has so much to offer, and especially if you want to sort of immerse yourself in the culture, you won't meet people if you're out every weekend or out of the country at least. Because let's look at it. When do people have time to hang out? On weekends, right?
Exactly.
So if you want to make friends locally, actually cut back on your international travel and then give Copenhagen a chance. Copenhagen is actually quite an awesome city, even on weekends.
I fully agree. And I know, many people that study abroad, they're like, okay, I'm just going to take the Ryanair flight every weekend to go somewhere. And I fully agree with you. I think if you're going to study abroad, the beautiful thing is you get 6 months to immerse yourself in a place and make it home and get to do that.
Yeah. Or look for one of those orange passes on the train and go visit somewhere in Denmark and, still stay in the culture.
Yeah. Aarhus is actually quite fun.
Yeah.
And I think with it too, we know people that came here for study abroad and then decided they loved it so much they came back when they could get a job here and move back. So that's a good chance for you to see, is this a place that not only is it good for the 6-month semester, but also potentially moving here for good?
But also remember that travel is not about putting pins into a map.
Yes.
Traveling is actually about savoring the experience. It's about going somewhere. It's about actually being there. And if you're in Prague for 6 hours, are you really going to get a sense of what Prague is like? And if you're drunk for 4 of those 6 hours, I mean, what is your experience going to be? And are you really going to remember that experience 10 years down the line? No. So, less is more.
Yes.
Agreed.
Amen. And on that note of really digging into the culture, one thing that I've seen, again, on some of these student boards, and that would be my personal advice, is sure, it's nice to learn some Danish, and you'll want to be able to, maybe by the end of your 6 months, place your coffee order in Danish, and that's a nice thing to do, and Danish people appreciate that. However, English is really good, and I would say that while Duolingo can help you before you arrive, one thing that may be a better use of your time would be to try to understand the culture before you arrive, because the language barrier won't be there like it could be in some other destinations of studying abroad like Paris or Rome.
I always say when I have a student who comes up to me and says, I went into a cafe, they didn't speak English. I always have to correct them and say, you went into a cafe and you didn't speak blank language. Because let's say you're in Copenhagen, you can't expect everyone to speak English. However, English proficiency is very high in Copenhagen and in Denmark overall. We're close to sort of 99% of the population who have some level of spoken English. So you can get by. And of course, you can always consider how much time are you going to sort of set aside for that language. I always think when I go to a different country, I always try to sort of have an idea of at least how do you say hello, how do you say thank you, and then depending on how much time I'm going to spend there, I sort of economize my time. And we can say learning Danish, it is a bit of a commitment, like learning any other language. And you can ask yourself, do you then want to focus on the culture? I would say regardless of where you go, always be aware of the culture of the country. I mean, always have an idea of what are the hot topics? What are the do's and the don'ts? Are there any potential taboos? Could you potentially offend someone? Just be sensitive whenever you enter a new cultural sphere.
Yeah. I think it's the big thing is realizing you're a guest of that culture as you come in, and your chance to enjoy it is to be willing to match up to it as opposed to walking in with your own.
Yeah. I'll say too, language is culture.
Of course.
However, if a 6-month stay is all you have, then maybe it may not be your focus. But a 2 or 3 year master's study, perhaps you'd want to take Danish lessons and really try to, especially if you're considering relocating here after.
And if you're going to live here afterwards, so say at some point you realize, especially those people who make the life choice of having children, we can always discuss that. But there's just something about, one thing is that, of course, you'll be able to talk to your children, you'll be able to talk to their professors, but let's say your children are having friends over that are coming to play. You can't expect that a 5-year-old speaks English. And at that point, when you have children, you have to learn Danish. If you want to be a parent who can not just communicate with your children and the professors, but with the friends. So there's just also something about what is your life situation at the time. I'm a big language nerd. I love learning languages. So for me, I always, regardless of where I go on Duolingo and I try to sort of master the language before I go, and I usually fail miserably. But I don't know. I like languages.
It's part of the fun.
It's so much fun.
As you say, it is culture.
It is.
Yeah.
And speaking of culture, one thing to realize as you come to Copenhagen, to Denmark also is, for the kids coming from abroad, drinking is professional here.
Yeah.
You have to realize if you're coming here, you're dealing with people that have been drinking since they've been 13, and you're going to lose.
Yeah, and one thing is you're going to lose, but there's also the risk of looking like a loser in the sense that while you'll see people drinking in public, being very intoxicated publicly is kind of not cool.
Yeah.
It actually, it's not a cute look.
No.
So be mindful of that. If you're new to drinking, while it's legal, be very mindful of how you manage yourself and what your intake is. Because no one will think you're cool when you're puking on someone's trainers outside a bar.
No.
I mean, you'll look like a major douche, and we
it
don't
gets
want
in the
that.
cobblestones.
It
too.
gets on the cobblestone.
yes,
It gets in your hair if you have long hair. It's just not cute. So be mindful of that. And also, if you're in a country and in a culture you're not aware of, potentially you can put yourself at risk. There are bad people out there, and even though Copenhagen is a
Sure.
relatively safe city, there are still idiots out there. So I would just say be smart when you go out.
Yeah.
And it's mainly for your own sake. I always say to my students that I hope they make a lot of poor life choices on the weekends, because we learn from those. But you have to be very responsible when you make poor life choices, and you have to make sure that you don't put yourself at risk.
Yeah.
So I would actually say, if you want to go out and drink, be my guest, but do it responsibly.
Yes. Just because there's 10 shots for 100 krona doesn't mean you have to drink all 10 of them.
No, I mean, sharing is caring.
yes, and that's how you'll meet people and make friends. Yeah, and which is also another thing that you do have to be aware that you will have some culture clashes and some homesickness and jet lag and all of these things, especially in the beginning of your time, that are very natural. But make sure that you're checking in on yourself.
But we have to be real here. Going away is actually quite a major thing.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So going through it without any kind of reaction actually makes me worry more than the people who get homesick at some point.
100%.
I mean, adjustment always comes with, all growing comes with growing pangs. And just expect that. Expect that some days will be tough. And if you don't feel anything, good for you. But most people will feel some kind of adjustment. And that, for some people, is difficult. So for some people, it's easier. But you'll most likely have certain experiences where you're thinking, oh, my God, I don't know what's going on here.
And we find, too, part of the fun, too, in going abroad is getting to bring a little bit of your culture with as well. Whether, for us, it's been, we like watching American football and bringing friends to go watch the bar. We've made Thanksgiving a thing and had friends experience Thanksgiving.
Love it.
I think it's also the other flip side, which is be unafraid to bring your culture with you to other folks so they can learn.
Exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of any kind of exchange. I mean, everyone gets something out of it.
Yeah, and you get out what you put in.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there's
The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it.
100%. Yeah. So these are a lot of things that can really help you. And another thing you can learn from is some of the fails that Mike and I had when we first moved to Denmark permanently. And we relive some of them in this video that you can watch right here. And thanks for watching this one, everybody. And thank you, Chantal. Hi.